Welcome back. We're focusing on the API chain. It is used to make API calls get a summary responses to answer a question. From langchain.chains.api.base import API chain. I need to make sure that I have the open API key. I'll create an end file, and within the end file, I add the OpenAI API key. In this main function, I want to create an API chain. So first, I need to create an LLM. So for the LLM, I'm using the OpenAI. That's much better because the chat OpenAI is suited for chat or conversational purposes, but I need to create the chain or use an LLM that's suited for multiple purposes or multiple works. If you look here, I need to pass all these information. So since I am working with the LLM and the API docs, so these are kind of like the two important aspects. So if you come down, you see where we have from here. So we have this method. I need to pass the API docs, the language model, and the other parameters are either optional or they're already being given. We'll pass the LLM and then the API docs. Langchain has some pre-built API docs. So if I go under the API library, and then I can see that I have various API docs. I use the news docs. So the news docs contain the documentation for this API. I will pass the variables to true to show us the steps that the LLM takes. We want to limit the domains to the news API. Okay, so I added the virtual environment here and I installed the Langchain. Let's run the API chain. So since we put the variables to true, so we can see all the steps that the chain is taking. API chain is calling this API, but the response comes back with an error, and the error says your API key is missing. It mentions to add a header as the XPI key. If I go to the website, so news API is where you can get an API key. So through this documentation, if I want to call the news API, these are the kind of instructions that you can take to get the top headlines or everything. And if you go back to the news docs, you can see that the top headline is here. So we add a header. How do we get the news API key? That's there. And we want to make sure that we have the news API key within the .env environment. Let's run this one more time. Okay, so we got status okay. So it has been completed. So we asked what happened last week in Vegas. UFC 300 event is set to take place in Vegas, and the flight card is highly anticipated and experts are predicting, and so on and so forth. So that's how you call the API chain. So from using the LLM and the API docs, you can call the API that you want. I want to look under the responses I got from the Langsmith. I can add the configuration here, and I can pass the run name. And then I also need to import the Langchain API key. If I run this one more time, okay, now I am in my Langsmith in dashboard, and I can see that I have this most used chains. If I look at the time right now, so I pretty much had this call around a minute ago, and I get these information from this call. If I click on it, you can see that this chain, this API chain, has a number of calls to the language model. This is what is passed, the context, the prompt is passed to the OpenAI. There are some instructions. You are given the below API documentation, so you have that, and then how the instructions on how the response object should look like and what the question has been asked and the API URL. Then you get the response. The API gets the response. Here's the API response, and then here's the generated output. And then this summary will be in the output. Once the chain is finished, you can get the output. And so I hope that this video was very helpful. We gone through the API chain, the library where the API chain is coming from, and how we could call this API chain on some predefined API documentation from Langchain. Of course, this is something that you can play around with, and you can build your own API and your own API documentation and call it and then see how it works. I hope this video was helpful for you, and if so, please give it a like so that other developers can view this video, and I'm looking forward to see you in my next video.